will say CO2 is about like 85% of all greenhouse gases that we have now, so it's like very hands-down dominant. And so what are the sources of these types of things? The main three sources come from transportation, electricity generation, and industries that basically either burn materials and create CO2 or are just using so much electricity that they're producing a ton of CO2. And so basically when you burn anything that is a fossil fuel, so that means when you burn things like coal, natural gas, you burn methane, propane, if you burn, what you normally put in your car, gasoline, that's all producing carbon dioxide as a product of that burning. It's releasing it into the atmosphere. So some other smaller sources, so these all together make up about like 66% of the greenhouse gas emissions. We also have addition coming from agriculture, so cows actually produce a lot of methane. They fart, there's a lot of cows out there, they're feeding the atmosphere with methane, and that's causing warming. We also have the commercial and residential sector. So in your home, say you have like a natural gas powered oven or stovetop, that's also producing greenhouse gases, and so that's what's considered there. Okay, so now you kind of have a sense of the sources and what is kind of adding to the problem. Let's talk about the problem itself. So now I'm just going to talk about carbon dioxide, because you know it's now the dominant greenhouse gas. So when we're looking at big numbers, that dominates, so it's kind of all we're thinking about at this time. And so this is a plot that's showing, okay, this black thing is almost white, but okay. So on the y-axis, we have million tons of carbon dioxide. First of all, I want you to realize that this is 6,000 million tons is 6 billion tons of carbon dioxide. If you think about an average size sedan-ish, it's about 1.6 tons. So this is equivalent to like 6,000 million tons of carbon dioxide is about 3.8 billion cars. And it turns out we only have about 1 billion cars on the Earth right now. It is just such a massive number. And it's funny, if CO2 was a color so that we could see it, it would be so incredible because we would have changed the climate so much just visibly. Unfortunately, it's clear to me. But anyway, so in 1990, I took these statistics from New York Times and NASA, and we were producing about 6 billion tons of carbon dioxide in 1990. In 1990, we all knew that climate change was an issue, global warming was happening, and we were like, oh, we got to cut emissions. And you can see, this last stat was given in 2016, we haven't like really done anything. That gray line is showing where the actual historical emissions are, and they're still at 6 billion tons. And so people have taken this data and said, based on what people are doing right now in the United States, how their behavior is, what our population is, we project that forward in time, and in 2025, we're still producing 6 billion tons of CO2 per year. So there's not a great change we've seen. Now, this isn't great change, in contrast to what we'd have to do if we wanted to keep the global average temperature from exceeding 2 degrees above pre-industrial. So let me spend a little bit of time on what that means. So when people are talking about, say you've heard about the Paris Accord or any of these climate agreements, they're like, ooh, we want to stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. What that means is they're saying in 1850, right, when the Industrial Revolution was happening, people are working factories and whatnot, they're like, okay, so the temperature was X in that year. We want to make sure that in the year 2025, we're not on average greater than that value by 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, whatever your baseline is. And so what I've shown here in this plot is saying, okay, if we want to keep ourselves below 2 degrees above pre-industrial, we would need to make our emissions look like this line. Recall, they look like this. We want them to look like this. That is like a non-trivial change, right? So that's going from 6 billion tons of carbon dioxide to 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide produced. That is a massive amount. It's almost incomprehensible to a human to understand how much a billion is. I have a hard time wrapping my head around it, but like this just indicates such behavioral changes that they're almost unfathomable, and I feel like policymakers are talking about this, everyone's talking about this, but in reality, things aren't changing at the pace that we really need them to be under 2 degrees of warming. So, okay, why do I care about 2 degrees of warming? Like, I'm living in 1 degree of warming right now. If you don't know that, we're already at 1 degree above pre-industrial. But, so basically some fun facts about, in a world where we're 1.5 degrees, so, oh, there they go. Okay, well, we saw In 1.5 degrees of warming, if anyone is excited about coral reefs, what you'd know is that at 1.5 degrees of warming, we have mass mortalities of coral reefs, but some of them would survive. So the occasional coral reef. But under 2 degrees of warming, so you can have 0.5 degrees Celsius difference, all of them are dead. In all the models, the probability of all of them being gone is almost 100%, which is pretty wild, because models don't really love to agree that much, and they really agree on that statistic. Additionally, at 1.5 degrees of warming, we still have ice in the Arctic during the summer, which I think everyone, like polar bears, Coca-Cola, ice, that would still be happening with 1.5 degrees of warming. But with 2 degrees of warming, we would most likely have Arctic summers with no sea ice. And I actually just went to the Arctic Assembly, and there's all these people who are really excited about investing in shipping. So like, we're just gonna sail around through there. Like, nobody wants that, right? Like, unless you're like an economic, guy who's like, I'm gonna invest in this. That's just not fun for anyone. There's gonna be nowhere for a lot of species to live. A lot of indigenous groups will lose out on their traditional like areas of habitation, hunting, etc. And then lastly, there's big concerns for global agriculture. So under 1.5 degrees of warming, some models basically say that agriculture is going to be okay because plants kind of like a warmer climate, they like a little more CO2. Well, under 2 degrees of warming, it's like too much of a good thing, and a lot of agricultural crops start to really struggle to grow in these environments they were previously used to. So that's, these worlds are very different, but that 0.5 degree change is so small. But I feel like people are often like, 1 degree is nothing, but 1 degree on a global scale is actually really significant. Okay, so why this brings us to why people are thinking about like what are other like things that we can do. This is like seeming pretty dire, and so people have come up with this idea of solar geoengineering. So, so solar geoengineering basically is saying, so the sun shines down on Earth and it heats our surface. And this is basically the idea that you could put something really high up in the atmosphere, but instead of letting all that light through, would reflect some back out to space. And as you can see, we kind of show that greenhouse gas, CO2, trapping heat, keeping the planet warm, which is important to a degree, but when there's too much of a good thing, we get too warm. So that's the basic premise. And to even simplify more, it's like putting sunglasses on the Earth is my best way of explaining it to anyone. Yeah, a little margarita. But what we really need to think about is like maybe this is a really fast, like cheap idea, but it's just not a perfect solution. So we're gonna really talk about what that means. Okay, but first we'll go back. So I had snuck in that little label aerosol, and people might not know what aerosols are. And so I bet you've all seen aerosols. So these are pictures from my summer. On the far left, fog is an aerosol. So when you have fog farming, fog is made up of little droplets of water. And once they get big enough, they can actually impact what you can see. And when they're big enough, they're basically taking light hits them, light reflects and refracts, and your eye can see that there is something there. And so we see fog. We also see color changes in things like sunsets. Sunsets, really deep red sunsets, are often associated with pollution. So basically, you can think of aerosols as these really small particles. They're not small enough to be a molecule, but they're large enough that they reflect sunlight. And so things like water vapor, fog, things like pollen, dust, sand. So when the Sahara Desert has big winds, blows sand, those little sand particles are aerosols. And then lastly, we show an image, NASA image of Beijing, which all this smoke and smog that you associate with really polluted cities, that's aerosol. So just a little context for what aerosols are. Oh, okay. So why are we researching solar geo? Why are we really into aerosols? Basically, so on the y-axis we have planet risks. I don't think I have an x-axis. I think it's just time. And so basically we're saying in time, if we just like keep burning fossil fuels willy-nilly, eventually we're going to get really, really substantial climate risks. That means things like massive storm damage, sea level rise, damage to cities, damage to personal property, just risks to vulnerable people who live on the coastlines, etc. Instead, people are like, oh, we're going to cut emissions to zero, which we're working on as a global community. People are trying to cut emissions to zero. So they want to say, we're not going to emit any more CO2. We're going to use renewable sources, solar, wind. Those are great things. And then our plots are still a little nice, right? Like we cut up our climate risk like halfway up. And then people are like, oh, well, really what we need is we're going to cut our emissions to 0, but we're also going to start pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. And to reach climate goals right now, that's really a necessary thing, and politicians are really starting to talk about this seriously. So solar geo comes in when they're saying, okay, maybe carbon removal and the renewable resources we need aren't quite there. Like they're not, the infrastructure isn't there, manufacturing isn't there. So in the meantime, maybe we can eliminate the peak of these climate risks by saying, okay, we're going to do solar geoengineering while we do these other things, and then eventually we won't need it. So if you see the period of time where we cut the top off of that little mountain, is when you're saying, oh, we're going to do solar geoengineering, we're going to cool everything down while we get our infrastructure going, and then we're in a position to remove carbon and not emit, we'll be safe and we can stop doing it. So that's kind of the way people are thinking about it right now. So, where did this idea come from? I see it like one down. Surprise. So this idea came from volcanic eruptions. So volcanoes have been doing a form of solar geoengineering for a very long time. So really, really powerful volcanic eruptions actually emit things called sulfate aerosols, which are essentially, when you see all these billowing smoke plumes, those are sulfates. They undergo a chemical reaction, and they become basically I think those like little drops in the sky, and they reflect sunlight. And so some volcanic eruptions will actually put material so high up that they're naturally doing this. So this idea was originally formed because it was like, oh, the Earth is kind of already regulating itself a little bit in its natural way. Can we leverage it in kind of a man-made way? Not too crazy. Oh, the sun. Okay. So here is just exciting. I have some fun volcanic events that are not fun, but they're kind of interesting. Sorry. So I'm going in reverse order chronologically. So one of the ones that I look at a lot in my research is Mount Pinatubo. So it's over there in Southeast Asia with a lot of these other volcanoes. So Mount Pinatubo was an eruption. I have some fun stats. Erupted in 1991, and it released 17 megatons of sulfate aerosol. And I honestly can't even comprehend how much that is. That is a massive amount of sulfur. So just imagine a huge smoke plume going high up in the atmosphere. And it caused global average temperature to decrease by up to 6.6 degrees Celsius. So right now we're kind of talking about a change of 0.5 degrees Celsius. So this is kind of on par with the type of change that we're seeing global climate change now. Okay, so these are other El Chichon, happened in Mexico in the 80s. This is a really slow animation. Mount Magalia also erupted in 2017, but it also had an eruption in the 60s that put a lot of material into the stratosphere. Krakatoa and my favorite is Tambora. Okay, so Tambora is my favorite because it happened in 1815. It produced what people refer to in 1815 as a fun term, the year without a summer. And so basically, it erupted and it had such large impacts on Northern Europe that year people basically, the summer was like fall temperatures. It was like rainy and cold all summer. And we basically have the novels Frankenstein and The Vampire because of that summer, because there was all these European authors who were like, I don't want to leave my house, I'm really bored, I'm going to write to my pen pals in other parts of Europe, and we're going to have a competition to write the best horror novel. So that's actually one of the results of that very large eruption. Okay, but I've only shown a few volcanic eruptions because in reality, we only care about ones that were super strong. And when I said super strong, I was trying to avoid the term stratosphere, so I'm going to define it. Sorry, I have lots of animations here. Underneath this black thing is a little city to show that this is the ground. But basically, I'm trying to show that with height, our atmosphere has different layers, and we define them differently. So we as people live in the troposphere. That's the lower part of the atmosphere, and it is a region where we have weather, right? So we have rain, snow, all the weather you can think of, hurricanes, everything happens in this layer called the troposphere. And the air in that layer is super well mixed. And that's why basically, like, if we have a lot of pollution in one place, it eventually like mixes away. Pollution is pollution, but it eventually goes away because this air is so well mixed, so turbulent. Now, higher up in the stratosphere, We basically have a fun thing called the ozone layer, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And we also have this very kind of not super well mixed. The air just kind of goes around the globe and it slowly works its way towards the poles. But it's not like well mixed. If you put something in one place, it's going to take a while to spread around, but it spreads around eventually. Now, also in the stratosphere, we have the ozone layer. As many of you may know, the ozone layer is something that keeps the Earth from getting too much UV radiation. So essentially, I think it's just a layer that keeps all of us from getting really terrible skin cancer. We need this layer to survive. We need the ozone layer in order to have things like any mammalian life, plants, animals, etc. So that's going to come back at you later. Just remember that. So basically, what I'm saying is we want to put aerosols up in the stratosphere so that they don't get rained out. They don't get precipitated. So they don't get snowed out. They don't get iced out. They stay up there for a while. And the reason that those volcanoes that I showed have such a big impact is because their aerosols, their sulfate, all went into the stratosphere. And once it's in the stratosphere, it's going to hang out for a while. It's going to hang out for like 2 years, maybe 1 year. But if you put it in the troposphere, it's only going to hang out for like a week. So you see, if I'm impacting climate, I need to be at a much longer time scale. So, okay, so what makes a good aerosol for this solar geo idea, for reflecting sunlight in the stratosphere? Number one, it's good at reflecting, but it doesn't produce heat. The thing we're trying to avoid is producing too much heat, right? Like CO2 is already doing that. We don't need more of that. We don't need it in a different location. We just want it to reflect sunlight. So that's my first image. So the first thing people ask themselves is, oh, how much does this little particle scatter? And the amount that a particle scatters is really dependent on what it is, what color it is, what chemical it is. And we all say, oh, when it's introduced to heat, does it like hold on to the heat, or is it just kind of ignoring? Secondly, the big question is, we really don't want to destroy the ozone layer. We need it. It is really good for the Earth. So we don't want it to be involved with destroying ozone. One thing I didn't tell you about volcanoes is that when we have these massive volcanic eruptions that put material in the stratosphere, we also generally see a decline in ozone. And it turns out, after a lot of laboratory and atmospheric studies, that sulfate aerosols specifically will work to kind of gobble up ozone, which is just not good. But we can talk about that later. So basically we want to say, okay, we don't want this to be destroying ozone, let's keep it simple, let's just make it not do anything. And so materials that scientists are considering, sulfate aerosols, which do destroy ozone, but the benefit is people are like, oh, volcanoes have already done this, right? Like, we have some basis. Like, it's kind of, the thing that it's natural, I don't know. But there's a thing that says it's kind of comfortable if we're looking at this because it's been done. People are also looking at calcite. So calcite is essentially like lime. It's in calcium carbonate, it's in toothpaste, it's in white paper, I learned. It is in baptismal. You can probably eat a lot of it and be okay. But it's very, very like plentiful. And it's another thing that people are researching. They're like, oh, this is really reflective, like sulfate, but it probably doesn't interact with ozone. So hence my labels. They're both good at reflecting sunlight. Sulfate tends to produce a little bit of heat. Calcite doesn't really produce heat that we know of. And lastly, sulfate is known to participate in ozone depletion, so it tends to gobble up ozone, whereas we think calcite may actually work to increase ozone. Also debatable. So, in summary of this kind of natural science section, is that solar geoengineering is a proposal to use aerosols to cool down the Earth, to put them there via planes or whatever, to reflect sunlight, and it's similar to big volcanic events. Scientists have looked most seriously at the two materials, sulfate aerosols and calcium carbonate. So, does anyone have any questions?
When you showed this being used as a way to allow us to like create, do some make policy change and put things in place, am I the only one that thinks, yeah, right? I mean, it seems like if you've got this like cheap, easy kind of works thing that doesn't really impact people and they don't have to make any changes, that they're gonna say, well, let's just keep doing this and then not put it in place.
Okay, so to repeat your questions.
Oh yeah.
Okay, So do people tend to think that solar geoengineering being easy, cheap, and not leading to people having to change their behavior, is that an issue? Do you think that that would make people not change their emission habits?
Yeah.
That is totally a thing we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
It is a problem. I have a whole slide on risks, and one of them is, oh, once we start doing this thing that doesn't affect me, that I don't have to think about, like, how likely am I to want to cut my emissions? And the thing is, like, no sane person or scientist would ever say that's okay, right? Like, that's just not how this technology should ever be applied. That's completely irresponsible. So, yeah, it is a problem because policy sometimes doesn't listen to science, and science sometimes doesn't get things right. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. When you look into the history of the Earth, you can find that there were like an ice age in the past, maybe 2 or 3 of them. So what triggered the ice age, and how we don't know that maybe somehow magically or scientifically is going to happen another one that is going to help us to deal with the global warming? Or maybe we can do something that triggers this micro ice age and help out with that process.
So the question is, so the Earth has historically had ice ages. So how do we know that either we might naturally go into an ice age versus could we artificially trigger an ice age instead of doing something like this? And Jen, you can help me correct. My paleoclimate knowledge is limited, but I'm pretty sure climate change or glacial cycles happen on 100,000 year cycles generally, and I think that they have a lot to do with the orbit and ellipsis. There's a very fancy word about like the way the Earth orbits the sun. So its orbit is constant. It's constantly changing and shifting. And in those periods when the Earth is further from the sun, you generally go into a natural ice age. And that's basically, it's called the progression. And so when you're in this kind of forward walk, it kind of like loops back and forth. I wish I had an image to show this. But yes, right now, essentially, like if we were on a 100,000 year cycle, we're about due for an ice age. There was a mini ice age caused by volcanic events in the 1800s, from like 1500 to 1800, but that was different. The natural, like, kind of large ice ages that you're thinking about happen on 100,000 year cycles. We're due for one, but essentially, it's unlikely that we will have them because we have now released more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than has been seen in millions of years. And so if you look at the climate of Earth, basically we'll take models and say, okay, we know from paleoclimate, from like fossil records, or from all these tree ring data, really interesting sources, that the Earth might have looked like this when we had equivalent levels of CO2 way back when. And we weren't in an ice age at that point. I think if you wanted to trigger an ice age, you could do like the mini ice ages from 1500 to 1800, and that was caused by a massive volcanic event. There was a series of volcanic eruptions that put material into the stratosphere. So in that way, I guess this proposal is kind of similar to triggering a mini ice age, but it's nothing like what the natural progression of the Earth would be. And I don't know if we'd survive an ice age. I often ask myself that.
And for example, the asteroid that hit when the dinosaurs were, did that trigger an ice age?
So that's the same thing. So I think the two things you're talking about, yeah. So that produced enough, it's not the same thing. Do you know what I'm saying? So it produced, I think, theoretically enough dust and ash to block out the sun. So it was like doing an extreme version of putting material up there that didn't allow light through. Does that make sense? And that would also be, we obviously don't think it's survive that.
Also put a lot of CO2 in the air at the same time, so that effect was relatively short-lived.
Yes. So.
Yeah, I also have something to add to that. For solar geoengineering, it's very different from natural scenarios such as volcanic eruption, in that it's something that we can control. It's an engineering project. So it's not like the scientists are going to prescribe how much we want to release into the stratosphere, and we'll stick to that schedule no matter what happens. Even if mini ice age comes and we see that it's very harmful, it's kind of like the process, if ever happens, will kind of be like you tuning your shower water. You put a little bit of sulfate into the stratosphere, and you see how much it has cooled the Earth. And like in the shower, if the water gets too hot, you turn it down a little bit. You wouldn't like it just to burn you. So, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that firstly, the scenarios that scientists has proposed to do solar geoengineering are generally really mild. They would do like turn down the sun by 1%, and that would be a big extreme case. Secondly, we will be monitoring the progress of the project if it ever gets deployed. So it's possible to have accidents, but like something on the order of mini stage that lasts a long time, I think it's highly unlikely for engineering project.
Just to clarify, like solar geo is like not in the deployment stage. Scientists are just thinking about this in a modeling sense, so we're talking about.
What kind of tonnage are we talking about for this type of material to go into the stratosphere? And is it a practical solution? I mean, are we able to haul that much material up there?
Interesting question. Yeah, so I will say, I don't know the exact amount that we would propose, because essentially modeling studies a lot right now, I mean, people do know this, but I don't look at it personally. We'll just say, okay, let's just turn down the solar console, let's turn down the sun in our model and just see what might happen. But if you're thinking about on a scale of like maybe 0.6 degrees Celsius, you can compare that to the Pinatubo eruption, how much material was released there, which I have. Back here, hold on.
Yeah, you have that. Keep.
Oh no, I need the one all the volcanoes listed. Sorry.
Yeah, you already went.
I already did that, didn't I?
Yeah.
Sorry, everybody. I think it was like somewhere on the order of like 17 megatons, which is 20 megatons. 20 megatons is sulfur. Should be the answer the whole time.
There was.
And I don't, like, I think people were like, oh, we could like haul it up there in a Saturn 47 that can fly really high. But I don't know that anyone's yet really seriously, like, people are seriously thinking about it, but I think scientists are still like deployment is not what we're focused on at all right now. Because it is really risky. It's, you know, this feels scientifically like science fiction, you know. Yeah, some people propose
Probably not as risky as doing nothing.
True, that's the argument, which we'll talk about, yeah. So climate risks, climate change versus climate risks, solar geoengineering, how do they compare? And oftentimes it looks like solar geoengineering would be safer, but there's unknown unknowns that you can't anticipate. But try to be very objective when I talk about this. But yes, there's always risks, yes.
I'm sorry I missed part of your presentation, but it's a promise that you're saying is that these aerosols basically allow the reflection of solar energy. But when do you stop doing this? When do you stop doing this? Because the more CO2 you put into the atmosphere, the more warming you're going to get on the Earth, which means that they will have to put more aerosols.
Right.
And
So
basically, the stratosphere is full of aerosols. And without really knowing what secondary effects are going to happen to the world.
oh yeah.
So I think that's a very risky proposition.
Yeah. So the question was, if you were to start putting, it's very similar to the first question. If you start to put material in the stratosphere, where do you stop? If you don't cut your emissions, you're going to keep wanting to keep adding. That's totally reasonable to say. It is a terrible idea. You don't want to be dependent on anything like this. You don't want to have to do it for a long period of time. It's just not advisable anyway. So the idea, the only, I think, logical way you'd want to apply this is if you had some way to guarantee that we could cut emissions. Like the only reason to do this is if you're going to cut emissions at the same time, right? Like if things are going to get bad with CO2, why make them worse with CO2 plus this other thing? You know, like that's not a good proposal. So people are only arguing like, okay, we need time to build manufacturing plants for solar cells and for wind turbines, but we literally will not be able to produce the amount of cement we need to do that in the time that we have before 2 degrees of warming. So we could deploy this, but we need some sort of marker or promise or something to guarantee that we also cut emissions, because otherwise I agree with you, it is definitely a risky proposition. It's certainly not advisable. Don't think you should do that. Any more questions?
Yeah, I think we'll let our speakers continue, and then if you have more questions, you can ask them at the break.
Okay. Okay, so how do we study this? So just in general, a lot of research follows the same kind of cycle. So there's experiments in the lab, maybe outside as well, and they help us choose how we might model this. And when I'm talking about models, I'm talking about computer models, which are basically saying, okay, if I put X, Y, Z into this little box there, how will it change? And then I can basically use the model to predict an outcome, and then compare it to my experiment. And then you just keep iterating around in this cycle, and then you get scientific knowledge and growth. Good stuff. Okay. So I have an example of what a laboratory experiment for solar geo might look like. It's very similar to any atmospheric chemistry lab group. And the question that in this particular study, what the scientists were trying to answer was how much does calcium carbonate react with other gases? And we're primarily interested in what gases would this might react with in the stratosphere where it might be used. And then also, how might calcium carbonate deal with ozone? Does it heat up ozone? Does it actually serve to deplete ozone? We really wanted to try and mimic the stratospheric conditions in the lab and just gather some data because no one's really looked at calcite in this way before. Now, there's also outdoor experiments. There is a potential experiment in spring 2019 in which there's a group of atmospheric chemistry scientists that are saying, okay, we don't know the ozone chemistry of the lower stratosphere. So we don't know how ozone gets either depleted or reacted with all other gases really high up in the stratosphere. So we want to be able to go up to that region and take samplings. And it's really hard to do something like this in the lab just because it's really hard to replicate conditions of the stratosphere. The stratosphere is really low pressure, which means you have to run a vacuum all the time. Vacuums are very fidgety. It's really cold, so you need to cool everything down a lot. This person who was dealing with this for the last 4 years, her vacuums die or comes die. It's not fun. You have walls. So in the stratosphere, in the atmosphere, there's no walls, and walls end up being a really significant portion of, kind of misleading things, because walls will say, oh, my particle's going to touch the wall and then do all this crazy reaction stuff that actually wouldn't happen in space. So people are saying, okay, let's use an outdoor experiment to look at calcite, but also to sample some of the other gases that are up in the sky. And so the idea of this experiment is this is a big balloon with helium in it, and at the bottom there's this little fan, and it would essentially just create this little region, because I told you that the stratosphere isn't very well mixed, right? So you have to create your own little region where everything's mixed. And then you could basically put particles into this well mixed area. You could let it do stuff for a while, it changes color, that's oh, it's reacting. It's doing stuff, it's getting bigger, it's sticking together. There's all these different things happening. And then what you could do is a Nintendo style. Maybe this was okay, this didn't work, but I thought I made it work, but it didn't work. So what this last slide would show is that the little balloon flies through that plume and just collects samples. And it was really cool, and apparently we can't see it. That's okay. Anyway, so that's a proposed outdoor work. That doesn't mean it hasn't been done, but it is something that's been done in other spheres of atmospheric chemistry or atmospheric science, where people are trying to look at, what's really going on there. Lastly, there's a lot of modeling work, which I couldn't really find a great picture for. But basically, we use computational tools, we use big computers, to study how maybe crops and plants and animals might be affected by this technology. You can also study, okay, what are the impacts on climate? What are the impacts on general weather and meteorological patterns? People also look at economic models. I would argue those are models. Anyway. And you can also just look at chemistry models that just flat out look at chemistry. There's also big models that kind of combine everything together. You can really hone this to what you want to do. A lot of what I personally do is just look at impacts on climate. And there's lots of different models that have different things going on in them. And when you look at a variety of models that are all kind of made by different people and compare what their robust or overarching impacts are, you can kind of take away what some of the major impacts would be. Does that make sense? If 10 of you did a math problem and then you all kind of got the same answer, you'd be like, okay, this is probably the right answer. ish, like some probability of us got this answer, some probability of us got this answer, but most of us got this general idea, then you could probably say that's the right way to go. And that's kind of how models are being treated, both studying solar geoengineering and climate change and global warming. Okay. So I also just want to touch on, we talk about the risks of climate change. So your question, we really focused in on, okay, it's probably not a great idea to do this unless we know we can cut emissions, because otherwise people aren't going to want to change their habits. I think that's my number one. We also don't know how exactly it might affect climate. There's so little research being done on this right now, and you just can't know until you really dig deep into a lot of different questions. Additionally, we don't want to start doing this and then suddenly stop. Can you imagine that? Say we start doing this and we're like, yeah, we've cooled things down, we've kept emitting CO2, we're still warming up without it, and then suddenly we stop and we get all this really fast warming. That would be really bad. So people are all like, that's just a bad idea. And then lastly, we don't want to do this forever and not cut emissions. That's unadvisable. Okay. So those are, there's another one. There's unknown unknowns. There's always unknown unknowns with anything. There's impacts you just couldn't imagine. This happens with like most things in life. It's a life lesson. Okay. Are there any more questions? I know it's kind of a quick section. Yeah.
Just a comment on your very last thing. If we don't cut emissions and probably also do CO2 removal,
Yes.
you've got a lot worse acidification in the ocean, which is another reason. Both
Yes,
CO2
so this does
removal
not
as well as-
resolve ocean acidification. It doesn't resolve a lot of other impacts of CO2. If you want to get really deep into the nitty-gritty, this deals with shortwave radiation, whereas CO2 is acting on long-wave radiation. So it's not like a very equal, like, oh, this is warming and this is cooling. They're doing kind of different things, so their impacts are not completely offset, if that makes sense. I don't know a good analogy for that. I'll try and think of one. Yeah.
Which body would you go to present something like this? Because this is, I assume, a worldwide kind of thing. So do you go to like the U? I mean, what are scientists thinking? Where would they go and present this?
So the question is, I have not been reading the question. The question is, where would you go to talk about something like this? So Jen is going to talk about global governance, kind of how people are thinking about this. But yeah, it is totally a global problem, but right now our globe is separated into states. And it is a really non-trivial question. I have, people talk about this at the UN level. It is in the IPCC report, so the geoengineering is listed. It's listed as something that's like, oh, we don't know enough about it. So yeah, people are talking about it, but it's certainly not as big as mitigation or adaptation, which okay. But yeah, Jen will go into the details of governance schemes and who you talk about this with.
I guess just to add on to your answer. So right now, solar geoengineering is really not proposed to the policymakers as a solution because we just don't know whether it's a good enough idea. And also, I would mention this, but like here in the States, there's some research done on solar geo, but a lot of parts of the world, there's people actually don't know about it, and there are no scientists studying it. So I think before any decision on deployment is made, maybe currently what the researchers in the field are focusing on would be to build capacities in developing countries, getting them on the table to even talk about this and study its benefits and risks before anything else happens. And that is something actually our group is working on. We're working with geos and people from the UN to just go and talk to people about different countries.
Yeah, I think right now the main focus is getting people to like think about. If people haven't heard of this, they haven't had time to digest or think about it. It is like when I first heard about it, I was like, I'm going to grad school. This is crazy. What am I doing? And then I was like, okay, like how do I feel about this ethically or morally? And it's a really complicated problem. And I think like right now, like personally, I'd say I'm in favor of like let's try and advocate for research. If we don't know, we don't know until we research it. Like, I don't think anyone's really thinking far enough to it. Anyway, with that, I'm going to give my mic to Jen. I don't know if this is our after.
Yeah, why don't we take a short intermission? So let's meet back here in 5 minutes. Thanks, guys.
CP with the library.
Oh, this is my
display the video. Well, not the video. The guy there, the guy which is the guy. Well, you know how to play the and the guy is the guy.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'm not sure. But we were on the slide about in the 90s, they were on since by 2013, there would be no ice on the Arctic. It's basically some periods of that. And so that by 2013, the Arctic. That's not true. I mean, there's ice in the Arctic and some look at it. So I guess what makes our models now? Yeah. Well, no, obviously, but I mean, it's just interesting because that had impacted, like, potentially governments that, and like that does impact governments. Then on the other hand, I was there's about five, and they obviously are aerosols. And so to some extent they have these effects that they got. But then on the other hand, so models say, some models say that you tell, like 12 years ago. The other models argue that other scientists in our arms argue that it would make global warming even worse because it traps their theories of traps warm. And no, I'm talking about like overall impact. Like some of the overall impact is going to be so positive that it's really not the thing. That's one of the models. And the other model is that it's clouds in general are going to make climate change so much worse than what we thought. So I guess that's kind of like hard to have to do research. There's such a wide.
Wait, no, they're not.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. What's interesting is that there's not that much really hard there hasn't been that much research.
No way. Didn't you turn it on for you?
No, I think it ran out of batteries.
Are you serious?
At least I think so, because as soon as I turned it on, I thought like, now I'm talking about the live stream. I thought that, yeah, we just forgot to turn it on. But then when
Wait, I
looked-
feel like it's dying way too quickly though.
I know. It's stupid.
Because
Yeah, it has. Oh. Oh, great. Cool. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
We're gonna solve it.
Yeah. Thank
Do I have this little?
That's funny. It's like, does somebody see my chest? What is that thing for you? I feel like it's just fireworks there in the dress.
So there's that.
Hey, welcome back everybody. We're gonna get started for the second part of our talk. Hopefully we fixed some of the slide difficulties. So before you guys leave, remember to fill out our survey. So thanks everyone.
All right, so for the next two sections, we'll get into some of the governance issues, which I think people here are generally curious about. So before we go into how to govern solar geoengineering, let's talk a little bit about why solar geoengineering should be governed. And to get into that, let's have a brief overview of the history of international climate governance. So what is international climate governance? It's kind of hard to say, but I put a picture here of one of the meetings at the United Nations Climate Conference. And I think this picture says a lot about what international climate governance is. It's a bunch of people with very different background and interests in the same room talking about the same issue and coming up with the decision. So on the one hand, I think it's really incredible that we would have this organization which is able to gather people with such diverse background into the same room to talk about the same issue. It really shows that the world cares about climate change. But on the other hand, because of the diverse background and interests, there's just going to be inevitable conflict of interests. And behind every climate negotiation, there's just a lot of dogfights between policymakers from different countries. So the final outcomes of any of these meetings are usually a compromise of different interests. So these are two important things I think you should remember. And where did international climate governance come from? So it actually didn't come from climate issues. It came from environmental issues, the ozone depletion issue. So if you remember from Colleen's presentation, the ozone layer is a thin layer of ozone gas in the stratosphere. It's very important for us human beings just because it deflects or eats away a lot of the harmful UV radiation from the sun. So these UV radiation are harmful to human beings because they can cause diseases such as skin cancer. Back in the 1980s, people use something called CFCs, which are a kind of refrigerant, and they are very widely used worldwide. But we gradually noticed that these gases, which seem very harmless at the start, they actually can eat away ozone. So people from all around the world got together and said that we should do something. And Montreal Protocol is the outcome of that meeting. It basically says that we should ban the use of these CFCs or gradually phase down the use of these CFCs. And Montreal Protocol was a huge success in that it really limited worldwide the use of ozone depleting species, and the impact is shown on the plot here. So the blue line is how much kind of ozone depleting species we have historically, and the red line is how much we would have if we just let the trend continue without intervention. So the ozone layer is actually now on a very healthy path of recovery. And according to Kofi Annan, this is perhaps the single most successful international agreement to date. And kind of riding on the wave of the success of the Montreal Protocol, environmental organizations had more voice and people really cared more about the environmental issues and climate issues in general. And they started to want to get together and do something about climate change. That's where the climate treaties start to happen. So here I'm going to go through a timeline of some important climate treaties. There are only 3, actually, so it's actually pretty simple. So in 1992, people got together and set up something called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC. By the way, you probably noticed that the UN is really good at producing awkward acronyms, and UNFCCC is one of them. We'll have another one, but only 2, I promise you guys. So this treaty was created, and it doesn't say much about what we would do about climate change, but it did say that we would do something about climate change. It also specified that developed countries would do more to curb the damage of climate change, because historically developed countries have put more carbon dioxide into this atmosphere to cause global warming. On the other hand, the treaty also says that we should aim for global consensus on any decision that comes out about climate treaty. So again, think about the compromise I was just talking about, and kind of imagine the consequence of this consensus clause. And then I also specified that countries or parties to the treaty, which is all the countries in the world, should check in frequently, basically annually, to make sure that we're on the right track and we're doing things. So some outcomes are these meetings. that happen basically annually, where representatives from all countries in the world gather together to talk about the programs and the outlook of international climate change. The second treaty that, actually the first treaty that had any real teeth on climate change issues is the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol is really, I think at the time, was an incredible effort for everyone to get together to say that we will actually do something about climate change. It used a top-down architecture, top-down in the sense that the target was imposed on different countries. So representatives got together and different countries was assigned a different target that they have to achieve for climate change. For example, Canada and US agreed kind of to cut down emission by certain amounts. There is no real enforcement, unfortunately, on the goals that came out of the Kyoto Protocol. So even though the treaties themselves has some clause on punishments, like what happened to certain countries if they didn't achieve their goal, there is no international army that would go and enforce that. And some countries also voluntarily participate in the treaty. So, for example, when Canada didn't reach its goal, instead of taking the punishment, they just quit the treaty. So now Kyoto Protocol is largely died, unfortunately. So I think the international policymakers really took this lesson to heart. They realized that it wouldn't work if we just tell countries what to do. So let's take a step back and try to build an international climate treaty that is bottom up. Bottom up in that we don't tell you what to do, but you tell us what you want to do for climate change. Since 2015 Paris Climate Treaty. So in this Paris Climate Treaty, countries will submit the individually determined national commitment, or the INDCs, our second and last acronyms. Here they will specify what the country wants to do for climate change. So for example, the US specified that it would cut down emission by 35% by 2025 compared to 2005 level. China said that it would keep its carbon emission by 2030. And there is no enforcement, again, because even if you have some fake enforcement clause, it probably wouldn't get enforced. But the treaty did say that countries will check in sometime in the future to update the effort or make new pledges to make the climate change effort go on. So this treaty was supposed to enter into effect by 2020, and I think a lot of you know that the US has planned to withdraw. But even if the United States withdraw, it probably still will enter into effect in 2020. So policymakers really, and actually not just policymakers, I think all countries really tried to do something with climate change, but the results are not very ideal. Here I have included a plot of climate model projections of how much carbon the world would emit as a function of time. It's a little complicated, but don't worry about the details. All you have to know from this plot are three things. What scientists think or where model projects the world would be without any climate policy. We'll be in a world that's likely to have a warming of 4 degrees or more. So that's catastrophic. If you remember Colin's presentation just now, even 2 degrees is a lot. With the targets or the pledges of the Paris Agreement, the INDCs, we would be probably on this trajectory. And that actually doesn't quite put us at 2 degrees of warming. It will put us at 3 degrees of warming, which is probably not enough for reasons that Colin mentioned. And in order to actually reach the 2 degree or 1.5 degree targets that the Paris Treaty specified, we have to do this. And that's, as Colin mentioned again, a radical change of how the world has actually functioned so far. And you might wonder why is climate change action so hard? To answer your question, let's do a simple thought experiment. So suppose you are an individual trying to do something for climate change, and there are 3 methods in front of your eyes. The third method, the cost is local and the benefit is global. So think about this as you pay, but everybody eats, for example, at a dinner. For the second method, the cost is local and the benefit is also local, so you pay for your own dinner. And for the third method, everyone else pays and you benefit. I think everyone here will probably agree with me when I tell you that I think the third option is the most attractive to me. So the countries would have the highest incentive to do the third thing. But it's also unfortunate that doing nothing resembles method 3 the most. So if you do nothing, you don't do anything for climate change. But if other countries, for example, reduce their emission, then you would get the benefit of reduced emission. So this also actually kind of brings up the central dilemma of solar geoengineering. Solar geoengineering is the thing that resembles method 3 the most. It's not exactly method 3 in that we don't know that there will be a global cost. In fact, if we do it correctly, there could be a global benefit. But if, like, say, a road actor did something that's really harmful, then there could be global cost. We have some confidence that the benefits would be local, so it's like the third option. And in terms of the first 2 methods, they most likely correspond to mitigation, so cutting down carbon dioxide emission, method 1, where if you cut down carbon dioxide here, then the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide would go on and everyone in the world would benefit. The second option is kind of like adaptation. If you build a dam here, you would stop the flood here and you get all the benefits of what you do. So if you run incentives, countries have the highest incentive to do this thing. But if we talk about what we would like to happen, then obviously we want to fix the problem from its source. We want to cut down emissions. So there is a mismatch between incentive and preference between countries to do things for climate change. So, so far we talked about the uncertainties and risks of solar geoengineering, and you might wonder why don't we just take it away as an option? I mean, it's not actually on the table right now. No one is talking about deployment. Scientists disagree on the impacts, and it would be easy to have a global campaign about how solar geoengineering is kind of a conspiracy theory, and it would be harmful for everyone, for example. So let's say we take away the option for solar geoengineering without actually studying all its benefits and risks. What would happen is that you should still remember that these 2 mismatches still happen between mitigation and adaptation. So we would likely adapt too much and do not do enough mitigation. But adaptation itself is very costly. On the left-hand side of the slide, I'm attaching a graph of how much countries have committed to the adaptation fund for developing countries and how much they're likely to need by the year 2050. And we need to increase our current adaptation fund by almost 5-fold to reach that target. And this is, by the way, a low level estimate. So likely the real number will be higher. And this money is going to come from places such like healthcare or education or technology. It's very costly. And if we take away the option of solar geoengineering, we actually have forgone a possible opportunity to reduce the cost of climate damage. So if we consider solar geoengineering, it turned out to be helpful and we use it, then it could buy us some time to do the mitigation less painfully without having people not have health insurance, for example. So if you agree with me that doing solar geoengineering research, it seems like a wise thing to do. At least we should see if it's good or bad, because the opportunity cost could be too high. Then why should its governance need it? Well, let's again do a simple thought experiment. Let's consider the world as comprising of two countries. These two countries don't talk and they don't really care about each other. They have different preferences, but they have no duty to ensure the welfare of the other country. So for these two countries, country one want to turn down the sun by 4%. Turn down 4% would give them their optimal outcome. And country two would want to turn down the sun by 1% because they probably prefer a warmer climate for some reason. And for example, Russia probably would be not insinuating anything, but the efficient outcome is probably to turn down the sun by 2%. This way, if the two countries actually talk, then they can probably compensate each other on the losses. And in the end, they might reach actually a better outcome than turning it down more. But what would happen in this case, in the thought experiment, is that the sun would get turned down by 4% because there is nothing stopping country two to turn down the sun by 4%. So the outcome is very inefficient in that the overall welfare is not maximized, even in this two-country experiment. So think about the real world where there are 200 and something countries, all have different wants and needs. Without governance, it would just come out to be kind of a chaotic situation. And this is kind of referred in the field to as free driver problem, as compared to the free rider problem. Is there any question on this section? Yeah.
A comment. You had a slide titled, "But the results are less than ideal," and it had many emission lines.
Right.
Yeah, that one. I would comment that those results are generally inconsistent with the paleoclimate record across the ice ages and going back to 1950 years. That the increasing, as shown at the upper dark lines, are consistent with warming roughly 12 degrees Celsius. And to get something like 1.5, you're going to need to cut emissions, not just to 7, you're going to need to cut it to 0 and below. So we're talking CO2 removal and solar geoengineering are required if we had in our first one. Sorry if that's a comment.
No, it's an important comment.
I'll repeat the comment, I guess. The comment is that according to paleoclimate record, then according to these emissions, we probably wouldn't even get to 4 degrees of warming. We might get to 12 degrees of warming, for example. And to reach the 1.5 degrees, maybe doing this is not even enough. We probably have to cut our emission to 0 now. It's a comment.
I would say that I'm looking out to 2400, 2100 are actually reasonable. It keeps changing.
I would just say, just so as you're thinking about model outlets, which I think are around us all the time, climate models are all very different. And one of the things that we don't know about climate is something called climate sensitivity. Like we have some idea of how, like, 1 degree of warming does X change to the climate. And I think different models will incorporate different sensitivities. And so these solid lines are kind of model averages, but you have to know that different models tend to overshoot the average, which is kind of all these like other lines. So when we talk about modeling, we're always talking about lots of models that are analyzed together. We don't just look at just one result. And that is also because climate sensitivity is something that we really don't know. So we're depending on lots of different models to give us a broad idea of what things might look like.
Also, this plot, my label is kind of a simplified version of what the plot actually said, because the original plot was really complicated. Here, when I said greater than 4 degrees of warming, it really meant that there's a high probability of warming greater than 4 degrees. So some models would actually output the result that you just mentioned, 10 degrees of warming or even more. But models, if you do a probability distribution, then greater than 60% of the chance would get more than 4 degrees of warming, is what this means.
I have like a silly question. Because US is the biggest producer of, well, they have more cars, they produce more emissions because they have so many cars in the United States. But does your model change when the government is more pro environment versus less environment friendly, like it's happening with the government? Do you know like there's a shift in the how the models is going to change? I mean, it's like a big thing, the policy, how they apply it, and maybe they can just do your model were going in that direction, and then maybe the change of government is going to use like a very.
So I guess, okay, the question is whether these model results consider changes in government behaviors or societal changes. Is that right?
A little bit.
Yeah. Also, I guess you mentioned that US is the biggest emitter. That's actually not true anymore. So currently, China is the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. The emission is actually almost twice as the US emission right now. But to address your second point, so these plots, some of them do consider policy intervention, like the Paris Agreement obviously considered the INDCs that countries proposed. So they considered what would happen if we cut down emissions, and that would be one kind of intervention. And these business as usual scenarios were projected based on a scenario without intervention. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I think what you're getting at is like these models don't inherently have like any government decisions in them. What like I as a modeler would do is say, okay, say for this Paris continued ambition line, what I'll do is say, I think that we're gonna have X tons of CO2 in the atmosphere during these years, and I give that to the model. The model itself is not adding in governments, but a researcher could produce different government scenarios. Does that make more sense? Yeah, so they're not like really built in. It's just you imposing something on the model.
And I guess recent models have actually been noticing what you're talking about. So these projections are a few years back. They're 2015. The newest projections do consider changes from different sources. For example, they will prescribe how much the power sector needs to do in order to reach a certain target, for example. Right. Sorry, this gentleman and then, yeah.
Did you know when they do these models, when you look at the worst case scenarios, do they consider how do they project the amount of energy that is going to be making that based on the current fossil fuel reserves or what is in the ground, or they actually include whatever new discoveries they're going to have, more positives about.
Okay, so the question is what factors are considered when they project this business as usual pathway? So it considers, I think, most importantly, economic development according to historical trend. So if the world continues to develop its economy according to historical trend, how much energy it will require. And it does consider, for example, gradual increase of energy efficiency, because the world has been getting better at using energy more efficiently. It does consider that based on historical trend, but it does not consider any breakthrough technology. For example, if nuclear fusion worked tomorrow, it probably would change the business as usual dramatically. So anything that we can conceivably be predicted based on past trend is considered into the projections, and nothing dramatically different. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I want to refer back to the question from the gentleman down there. So, did we see a rise or a rise in the emission of greenhouse gases after the conservative government that was elected in 2016? Was there a change that was sort of significant or mentionable?
The question is, do we see an increase in carbon emission after the current president was elected?
I think right now the data is being processed.
Okay.
But a good example of something like that, it is visible in these trends. So the fall of the Soviet Union, you actually see a pretty drastic dip in emissions because political reasons. I actually really don't know why that would have exactly happened. The fall of the Soviet Union, you see this dip. So you can identify changes in trends that correlate to political changes. And I'm not sure our energy use would be associated with a conservative government. At this point, I'm not sure we are at this point changing out a lot of our coal power plants to natural gas, in spite of the fact that President Trump is talking about coal a lot just because it is more economical. So I think at this point we're probably reducing emissions.
In the United States, CO2 emissions fell in 2017 and increased.
They increased
in 2018.
during this year. Okay.
Right. Alright, so another question or?
Yeah, we'll wait for the question to come in.
They have to increase because the United States now is the largest producer of fossil fuels. With all the fracking.
We're actually not the largest producer of fossil fuels. China actually emits about double.
No, I'm talking about producer of fossil fuels.
You mean like excavator, like mining,
gas,
removing
oil,
from
oil.
fracking, etc. Okay, I see.
Because of the new developments of the new research, discoveries now in the city more, so they definitely have to go up.
Right, we can talk about specific impact of specific policies maybe after. Alright, but I will go on to the next section just so that we can finish on time. And we'll have plenty of time for discussion later. So now that we've established that it is necessary to govern the deployment of solar geoengineering, let's look at some specific issues related to governance. The first one is, I think, probably naturally, what are some options for a treaty on solar geoengineering deployments? And if you think about it, there are roughly 3 kinds that we can use to govern solar geoengineering. The first one, we can do international governance. That will kind of be like UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, where all the countries get together and agree on targets before any action is taken. For the second method, we can also govern solar geoengineering deployments by a consortium states. So regional countries might get together and decide on a deployment, and they can negotiate with any outside party on the specific agenda. By the way, the map is only shown here schematically. It's actually the different continents of the world. These are not the map for deployment paths. The third method is to basically have no international governance, but having the decision made by individual governments directly. So this will result in a diverse set of goals and targets from different countries in the world. So let's talk about the pros and cons of these different methods of international governance. So if solar geoengineering deployments is internationally governed, then the obvious advantage would be that it's the most legitimate way of governance. Everyone agree on the same goal, and we think that it's maybe even democratic enough, for example. It will produce an efficient outcome if all countries participate and abide by the rules. I think this is obvious from the example that we talked about before. On the other hand, decision-making under this kind of governance will be very, very slow, similar to maybe even slower than the international climate governance that we have seen so far. And it will be intrinsically just unable to adapt to fast changing conditions. And for novel technologies such as solar geoengineering, adaptation capability might be very, very important. If something goes wrong, then we need to make a fast decision of what to do next step. For the second method, where the deployment of solar geoengineering is governed by a consortium states, the advantage is that it's more flexible than if the entire world has to abide by the same action rule. It's closer linked to reality because internationally some countries have naturally more affinity with other countries. Consider, for example, the US and EU versus the US and China, for example. It does provide some incentives for non-members to join, in that if you see that other countries have formed a club to do solar geoengineering, then you might want to also be part of it so that your decision, your voice can also be heard. The disadvantage is that non-members can challenge any treaty or any possible positive outcomes that come from this consortium of states. And there's also decreased legitimacy because the effect of solar geoengineering will be global, but the deployment decision is only made by a limited number of countries. The third option is the chaotic one, where each individual country make their own decisions. This doesn't mean no communication, but it does mean that countries don't agree by the same rules in general. So the pros is that there is no coordination effort needed. The threat of counter-geoengineering might be used to encourage rational action. So counter-geoengineering here is any effort that can be done to deter the effect of solar geoengineering. For example, maybe you can release very potent greenhouse gas to increase the temperature of the Earth to deter other countries' action of doing solar geoengineering. And that would be a threat to any country that wants to deploy any amount of irrational solar geoengineering speed. So the disadvantage, I think it's also very obvious. This will result in kind of a market outcome. And we have already seen that it's likely not going to be efficient. And it can also cause potentially disastrous deterrent methods such as war. And we can also talk about some potential roles that governments could play in solar geoengineering deployment in addition to the exact treaty structure. So it could first of all act as a forum for discussion, which currently it already sort of is. We do have organizations under the UN that go to different countries and talk to local governments and people about solar geoengineering, try to build capacity from individual countries. It's likely that an international governance body could coordinate research or share information, because these are things that the current international climate treaties already do. Like under the UNFCCC, for example, reporting is one of the duties assigned to countries. The international governance body could possibly set some standard for how we would do solar geoengineering, but it's unlikely that they would be able to make decisions on deployment or dispute resolutions, because these are actions that require actual interventions, either militarily or diplomatically, and that is just not something that the international body right now is good at doing. And I'm not being cynical here. But existing international law does have something to say about solar geo, but there's not much. So let's look at some things that might be related to solar geoengineering. The first one, of course, is the UNFCCC. It doesn't really address solar geoengineering at all in any capacity. The Paris Agreement set a target of limiting the temperature increase of the world to 1.5 or 2 degrees above industrial. So it's not contradictory to solar geoengineering, because the goal of solar geoengineering it's basically to limit temperature increase. But there's no specific mention of solar geoengineering from any country's pledges to Paris Agreement. The Montreal Protocol could apply if solar geoengineering does have some ozone depleting effects. But again, no specific mention on how to control the deployment of solar geoengineering from Montreal Protocol. And then the other thing that might matter for solar geoengineering is the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD. Actually issued a moratorium on solar geoengineering research, but it's actually only on the kind of research that's irresponsible and non-controlled. It doesn't forbid any research that's controlled and with good consideration. In addition, participation to the CBD is voluntary, so countries can be parties or non-parties as they want, which is generally true for any international treaties. And the decision is non-binding. So it's more of a guideline than an actual rule, I guess. I guess adding to the problem of the international law currently not having much to say about solar geoengineering. Solar geoengineering generally has a PR problem. Firstly, there's just not a lot of outreach in the field. There's only been a few projects done on solar geoengineering perception in the general public, and mostly in developed countries. So even though developing countries might be most affected by any deployment of solar geoengineering, there's basically no research in any developing countries. There's one program in China and some talk about solar geoengineering in India, but I'm not personally aware of any other efforts in other developing countries. So we really, I think as scientists in the field, we really need to increase our efforts of engaging the public on this topic. And secondly, even though there is not that much discussion, the kind of discussion that goes on the internet seems to be about the wrong topic. So for example, if you search for solar geoengineering on Twitter, which is a popular social media, which I'm sure everyone has heard of, most of the discussion is actually on chemtrail. Chemtrail, by the way, is a conspiracy theory that says the government is already emitting some kind of sulfur-containing species into the stratosphere to control the climate without us knowing it. It's not true, but it used to be the first thing that jumps out if you search for solar geoengineering on the internet. So here's a plot that I took from one of the organizations that talk about chemtrails. They believe that these condensation trails that airplanes emitted actually contain sulfur to control the climate, which is not true. And this viewpoint is actually endorsed by many knowledgeable people, I guess. Like, for example, this doctor here said, you can read it, I'm not gonna, but she's basically saying that the government is trying to control the climate and solar geoengineering is already happening and it's real. So this really, I think, diverts the attention away from the real issues. Here, a lot of audience have raised a lot of good questions. For example, what if we do solar geoengineering and just stop cutting emission? That, I think, is a legitimate and real question, and we should be focusing our attention on that kind of discussion instead of unreal conspiracy theory, which is not really productive for the society. And there are some other questions related to governance and social science in general of solar geoengineering. The first one I've kind of mentioned, it's the climate equity and climate justice. In research, I think the researchers are prone to start their assumptions from a benign worldview instead of a realistic one, and that can lead to very misleading research outcomes. In practice, also, as I mentioned, developing countries currently just do not have the capacity to participate in the discourse even of solar geoengineering, let alone any potential governance of its deployment. And on top of that, the connection between social science and natural science in the field of solar geoengineering is also kind of lacking. For example, there is just very little research on how goals proposed in social science, such as equity or efficiency, project to possible solar geoengineering scenario. So the policymakers might have set of goal in their mind, for example, maximizing productivity or having an equitable outcome. But natural scientists are now actually studying the solar geoengineering in a way to achieve those goals. So this gap should be bridged. Okay, so in summary, we have talked to you guys about solar geoengineering and some issues related to it. We have said that aerosols can be used to cool the earth, and in order to study solar geoengineering's impact, both lab studies and modeling studies are being done. And on the governance side, we have established, hopefully, that international governance is going to be difficult, but it's quite necessary. And people should be involved in solar geoengineering decision-making in general. And that's why we're giving this lecture to you guys, and thanks a lot for being here. We'll take any questions.
Yeah, you talked about the 3 possible ways of governing it in the beginning, and I know you discussed like pros and cons for each one, but do you have a personal idea of which one would be most effective?
Okay, the question is, among the 3 different modes of governance, I discussed which one I personally think is going to be the most effective. That is very hard to say. I think definitely I'm against the idea of having no international governance, so I wouldn't say the 3rd option. But between the 1st and 2nd one, it's hard for me to say which one would be more effective in achieving the best results. Again, I think maybe I'm a little bit cynical on the UN process. I just don't think internationally we have done enough to mitigate the damage of climate change. And so that's a method that's been tried and kind of shown to be ineffective. Nonetheless, for something like solar geoengineering, if you don't achieve international agreements on the deployment, then all sorts of issues can come up, like countries can start fighting each other, and that's the last thing we want to see. So it's not ideal, but maybe desirable. On the other hand, if you have a consortium of states governing, then it's probably more effective, and that's how the world at least to me, how the world works right now. Like countries form clubs and they do things in unison within themselves and not necessarily in coordination with other countries. So if that's already the reality, then that might work out for the best. But I don't think under that scenario that, for example, climate equity can be guaranteed. And it's just inevitable that some country need to sacrifice, and those might be the countries that need the most help. So I don't know how to answer that question.
You mentioned top-down types of governance, where you're set at a limit and you can't exceed that limit of emissions, for example. But another type that I'm thinking of would be incentive-based governance, where you could give countries, and I don't know what could be a feasible incentive considering the incentive that already exists, which is to mitigate the net effects, right? But are there any efforts or anything being considered related to incentive-based governance, subsidizing these types of things, for example?
Okay, so the question is whether we're doing anything to incentivize countries to cut down their emissions and do something about climate change. Actually, yeah, I think the world is doing all it can to incentivize. So there is fund, for example, being established for developing countries to do adaptations. And like China, where I come from, give huge incentives to solar cell companies, for example. And in the US, there is a lot of effort, mostly for health reasons, to cut down emissions. Within the private sectors, even companies are doing their part, for example, to adapt green technologies. A lot of those will save them money. But fundamentally, the conflict is an economic one. So the thing is that cutting down emission costs money, And even though climate change is painful, economic depression is also painful. So, like for example, if you're a country that has no electricity, which is true in a large part of India, for example, then do you choose to not burn any fossil fuels and let your people live in darkness and even disease? Or do you, knowing the bad effect of climate change, still develop your electricity sector with fossil fuels? Because that is the cheapest way so far. That is a hard decision to make, and I think that's the fundamental conflict behind climate governance. Yeah.
So one of the reasons originally for CFC wasn't just the ozone layer, but also the ill health effects that it could have on humans, these aerosols. So I guess I would ask, how do these new sulfates, how do they affect after they've done their year in that ozone around the ozone layer, and like how does it affect humans? I guess in a health policy way.
Okay, so the question is how the sulfur deposition, I guess, affect human health. So I guess firstly to give you an idea of how much sulfur we are proposing to, or not us scientists are proposing to put into the stratosphere, it's only a few % of how much is already emitted in the troposphere. So human beings emit sulfur naturally, not naturally, by our choice into the troposphere when we burn fossil fuels, such as coal. And the amount of coal that's already in there, it's a huge amount. And to cut down the sunlight by 1% would require maybe only 1 or 2% of it. So it's not actually going to be a huge amount. And health impact of the direct deposition will not be that big, even though it's not minimal or it's not negligible. But there are other things to consider for the health impact. For example, there could be change in the atmospheric chemistry. So it could change the oxidative capacity, how things oxidize within the stratosphere. And that could impact, for example, the amount of ozone in the troposphere. And ozone in the troposphere is actually a cause of respiratory diseases. So I would have to say that there's actually not that much research done on human health impact in the solar geoengineering field. And the few studies that's being done, it's very high level in that it doesn't directly address health impacts, but it addresses, for example, the concentration of pH in the troposphere. So I don't know, guys, it's my answer.
So my question is, so there's a lot of debate over pollution being an act of environmental racism and classism, right? Because the more privileged countries get to pollute at higher rates, and the more underprivileged countries suffer. And then we have these big meetings where people are equally stakeholders, but not emitting at the same rates. And it seems like a lot of our solutions seem to commodify emissions instead of work towards really reducing them. So like the cap and trade or a carbon tax. So I'm wondering, do you think that it's necessary to commodify emissions in order to reach a solution?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, it's whether resolving the carbon dioxide issues through economic means is a right way to do it. Like you mentioned, carbon trade and carbon tax are those effective methods. Actually, my answer would have to be yes, because so climate change, I think very fundamentally, it's an economic issue. So suppose, well, so I would talk to Republican congressmen who did not believe in climate change, and I asked him, okay, so what if, let's say, mitigating carbon dioxide would cost no money? Would you still not believe in climate change? And then he took a step back and said, okay, I never thought about the problem that way. If it costs no money, then I would think twice about it, right? So it's not that people don't think climate change is real, it's because it costs a lot to take care of it. And carbon tax and carbon trade are actually policy instruments that's designed to address this kind of issue. I'm not sure if you're aware, but for example, the cap and trade program was hugely successful in the US environmental policy in the 1990s, I think. Yeah, okay. It was actually, if you can believe it, it was actually a policy instrument proposed by the Republicans. The idea is to cut down sulfur emissions, or actually at the time to cut down acid rain. And that policy turned out to be hugely successful. Now, sulfur emission is hugely reduced, and it caused billions of dollars of benefits and welfare increase to the society. So I think since climate change is an economic issue, it really needs to be addressed economically. And I personally do not know another policy instrument that would have as pervasive and fundamental an impact as something like carbon tax, which will just spread the cost of climate change to everyone as it should be, because it is really everyone on the earth that's contributing to climate change. So it makes sense that we each pay a little bit.
I think in the interest of time, we'll end the questions here. So if you have more questions or you'd like to participate in the demo, you can come down to the front of the lecture hall. But let's give our speakers a round of applause.